Now, there's some controversy going on with the whole Brexit plan, and that would be the separation of the UK from the rest of the European Union. It has been discovered, it has been revealed, that many of the think tanks that were supporting the Brexit were receiving funding from the United States. Some of those groups include the Institute of Economic Affairs, the Adam Smith Institute, and the Policy Exchange, and the Legatum. I believe I'm probably pronouncing that right. Now, essentially, these think tanks are not only just advocating that the UK should separate from the rest of the European Union, but that they also have other certain ideas that should be used. For example, reducing the amount of state regulation over hedge funds and banks, etc. Of course, tax cuts. Opening up all the UK services, including healthcare, to foreign competition, as well as getting rid of many of the EU regulations in data protection, your privacy, pharmaceuticals, food safety, and others. In other words, a complete kind of austerity drive. Take these state services, privatize them for profit, get rid of many of the regulations that try to protect people from as much harm as the free market does. Now, while this is a bit of an outrage, it really shouldn't be that surprising that the US would have a stake in the Brexit. Because I think it's important to look at why the EU was formed to begin with. Okay, now, I was in high school when the EU came into effect, like about 1999, and I remember hearing about it. Now, if you look at how things were before Brexit, they were kind of a mess. Essentially, that whole European area does a ton of business with each other. Now, one of the main problems that they were going through was dealing with all kinds of problems when switching from one currency to another. When you had part of your, say you were manufacturing something in Germany, some parts came from Bulgaria, some parts came from Romania, some came from Poland, etc. Now, dealing with all these different currencies and trying to deal with their fluctuating values all the time was a real pain. Essentially, some currencies were tied to either the pound or the German currency with some elasticity. In other words, it was a pretty complicated situation, and it was a real pain trying to move money around quickly to do business with them all being different values that were constantly fluctuating against each other. So they decided to create one currency, which solved all of those problems and made trade a lot easier. Now, instead of having just some area where you have, say, to be able to get something from another country cheaper because the currency is of less value, now you have a situation where there is lower wages or wage differentials between the European countries. In other words, it's still kind of the same US-Mexico relationship, but instead of it being a separate currency, it's really more of a wage differential kind of situation. So in other words, that's one reason why the EU did that, was to massively simplify trade that took place within the EU. Now, another major reason is that the creation of at least a relatively centralized European government that could represent the interests of all the European countries and having one united currency gave them leverage over the United States. The United States, it was much more difficult for the United States to play different countries against each other. Now, with one currency, what the EU can do is wield far more economic power than these individual countries could by themselves. Because now you're not dealing with all these different little currencies, you're dealing with a single currency, a euro. And this would give them more power on the market. And as we have seen, with the trends in the last few years, a lot of countries trying to move away from the U.S. dollar. We see Venezuela exchanging in a multitude of currencies, the Chinese yuan, the Russian ruble, and the euro, to get around a lot of the banking sanctions that have been placed upon them by the United States. So essentially, the hegemony of the U.S. dollar has created the alternative to it because of the Bretton Woods Agreement, etc., which gave the U.S. a dominant role in dominant economic role across the world through the financial system, the owning of the U.S. dollar, and the U.S. dollar being the world's reserve currency and the one mainly used for trade. So essentially, the European Union formed this currency in order to compete with the United States, or to at least undermine much of the influence. And now we see currencies competing to replace the US dollar. We see the petro yuan with the Belt and Road Initiative coming out of China, Russia wanting to do deals in their own currencies with Iran, and the European Union quickly maneuvering to try to get their currency to replace the US currency as the main currency that's used for trading. Now, it's in the interest of the United States to undermine this. What they can do is, if they can weaken the European Union by, say, getting rid of one of the most powerful members, which would be the UK, then they've undermined the power of the European Union. So you would very likely to see, if this Brexit is actually successful in getting the UK out of the European Union, we could see this popping up in a lot of other countries. The US funding groups that try to get countries to leave the European Union in order to undermine it. I mean, this is not some kind of grand conspiracy or anything. This is just politics in general. This is power plays by different countries throughout the world to try to maintain their interests, to undermine other interests. This is not some kind of ridiculous conspiracy to build, this one world government. As we saw back in 2008, 2009, people were talking about the Amero, this one united currency for all of North America. That absolutely never came true. The alleged Afro, one currency for the entirety of Africa. At the same time, those same people were trying to destroy the gold dinar, which would have been essentially one kind of currency for all of Africa to use. So it's amazing how the people who were claiming this conspiracy of a one world government coming, and then, continental currencies coming up, were the same people who were behind that were also destroying continental currencies. So far be it from some kind of ridiculous conspiracy to control the world, to create a one world government, NWO style nonsense. This is just politics and economics as usual, taking place on a global scale. So it really should not be surprising in any way, shape, or form that you would actually see the United States trying to interfere with the Brexit negotiations, the whole Brexit, maybe even being behind largely the whole Brexit movement to begin with. I mean, there are many people inside the UK that want to leave the European Union for usually their own petty reasons. The Muzzies are taking over. The European Union is like a one communist thing, European socialist states, trying to refer to something that Lenin said and taking it completely out of context kind of thing. So, I mean, far be it from this kind of conspiracy, but it's certainly well within U.S. interests to try to fund the Brexit, or to create think tanks, to control think tanks that forward the idea of leaving Brexit, because it is certainly within U.S. interests to undermine European power.
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.